Thank you, Renee. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Hope you're having a great Thursday. As Renee mentioned, I'll be presenting on design concepts through feasibility testing. And really, this is going to be based on my past experiences, what I've seen in the industry,
Okay.
uh, as well as what some of the industry standards and guidance documents would suggest. So first things first, covering the agenda, I'll briefly go over my background, then really jump into the 4 steps of creating a flawless package design, touch base on some of the standards and guidance documents that are noted, and then wrap up with any questions that you may have. So as Renee mentioned, my name is Wes Bush. I'm the Director of Packaging Engineering here at Network Partners. I have just over a dozen years of experience directly in the medical device packaging field, and the focus of that has primarily been around designing and developing sterile barrier packaging systems. I'm also joined with members from our team, some additional SMEs. We have Lon Goldbaum, Dr. Jane Severin, and last but certainly not least, Harold Reisman. So before we really jump into the presentation, I just want to state that the scope of this is really sterile medical packaging, as it would be covered under ISO 11607. However, the concepts and things that were discussed here from a high-level perspective really could be applied to any packaging design. So the first step, you have to be on the team. This may seem super obvious, but you really need to be an integral part of the overall project team. You really need to be included at the onset of that project or as early as possible. Maybe not part of the first conversation, but as soon as you can, as part of that initial development process. Industry and a lot of MDMs, obviously the focus is the device, but as we all know, the device isn't the actual product that's being sold. The product is the device, as well as its packaging and labeling. And as part of this process, you really need to develop the packaging labeling alongside of the device. And if you ultimately really want to be successful, the packaging development process or development function, it really needs to be included in the overall new product development and design control process within your organization. And ultimately, why is the push to have this be included early on? Ultimately, you're trying to buy yourself time, right? The time required to create a flawless package design, which I'm going to dive into for steps 2, 3, and 4. So first things first, you jump right into the design process, right? The answer to that is no. Hopefully you're familiar with this graphic here on the right. This is the FDA design control waterfall diagram. As you can see, the design process is actually included right there in the middle. So you don't just jump into designing, you have a few steps before that process. So you really need to establish your user needs and design inputs, establish what those design requirements are before you can start that design process. And per 21 CFR Part 820, a few definitions here. Establish, means to define, document, and implement. Although the CFR doesn't actually define user needs, it's really the intended uses of the device, or in our case, the package. And finally, the design input means the physical and performance requirements of a package that are used as the basis for package design. So we'll dive in a little bit deeper as to the user needs and design inputs that you'll want to consider. So first things first, you really need to understand from your customers, the end users, what is the overall intended use of the device or package? First things first, who's the actual user? Is it the doctor, the nurse, technician, the patient perhaps? And where is this being used at? What's the use setting? OR, ER, ambulance, at home perhaps? They're likely going to be storing your package someplace prior to use. You need to understand, are there any storage or size constraints that you need to be aware of from a physical package size perspective. Oftentimes, there may be multiple components within a package. You want to understand if there is a layout or arrangement of those components that may make sense, maybe perhaps in the order in which they're used. Similarly, from a labeling perspective, what components are labeled, how are they being labeled, what end panels or locations are they being labeled to ultimately help with your end user. At some point, your end user is going to have to open the package. What are some of the opening features that are included? Is there pull tabs? Is there chevrons? These types of considerations need to be made. And ultimately, you need to ensure that you're able to aseptically present the sterile product or inner package into the sterile field. Ensure that the end user is capable of doing that. And finally, after they're finished with the package, are there any disposal or recycling concerns that you should be aware of? As far as the overall configuration of your package design, your end users are going to help define whether it needs to be a single sterile barrier system or a double SBS. Also, what is the quantity in which your end user would likely need to order? Also, as it relates to quantity, are you going to be providing this in a single pack, or is it something that gets consumed on a routine basis that needs to be a multi-pack type of configuration? Additional user needs and design inputs, you need to work closely with your internal partners and get their voices heard as well. Now that you're finally on the project team, right, you need to work closely with each of those functions. So first off, working with the design and development engineering team, they're going to have all the specifics around the actual device itself. What is the device made of? What is its physical size and dimensions? What is its overall weight? Is the device itself, is it robust or is it fragile? Is there multiple components included, or is there a single component with multiple sizes? Is the product itself or device itself, does it have any sensitivities to temperature, oxygen, moisture, or UV? Are there certain contact points on the device that you may want to avoid due to concerns of damaging the device? Are there concerns around sharp edges, points, or protrusions that you may want to protect? Not only protect from the device, but also protect from the sterile barrier system. And also, what's the intended shelf life of the device? And just a note here that the labeled shelf life will certainly be the shortest between the device and its packaging, and also within a kit configuration, it'll be the shortest of any given component within that kit. Working closely with your sterilization partners, they're going to help determine what the actual sterilization method is. Certainly, sterilization plays a huge role in understanding the compatibility with the various packaging materials that you're able to use, as well as label compatibility. Certainly, if you're using a surface sterilant such as EO gas, you're going to want to use a porous material. As it relates to the actual labeling compatibility, I want to understand that those labeling materials are compatible as well, but also ensure that from a design perspective, that porous substrate that is required for EO sterilization or surface sterilants, you're not covering up all the porous material that you've defined. Understand if there's any size constraints as it relates to maybe the chamber or the carrier in which the product's going to be sterilized within. Also, the palletization patterns and overall load densities would also come into effect here as well. Certainly, you're going to have input from sales and marketing. If you're not able to work closely with your actual external customers, your actual end users, oftentimes your sales and marketing personnel within your project team are going to be able to help you with these aspects of the design. They're also going to be able to understand the overall volumes of the products or overall volumes of the actual product that will be sold, which will directly relate to the overall costs that you may be able to have as part of the package system. And of course, if you get sales and marketing involved, they're certainly going to want to have input on branding, overall aesthetics, and graphics of the packaging. Your manufacturing partners, first thing, where is this product going to be packaged? What's the packaging site or location or locations? Ultimately, there's probably going to be a sealing process of some type required to seal your sterile barrier system. What equipment is available at the location? Does it have capacity? Do I need a new piece of equipment? There's all kind of factors there as it relates to the actual manufacturing side, as well as the costs associated with manufacturing. From a regulatory perspective, you're going to want to understand where we're registering this product and where it's ultimately being sold, and really understand if there's any country-specific requirements related to the packaging and labeling. The labeling itself, you want to understand the labeling substrates and inks that are being used, as well as the printer ribbon, which is often forgotten about. Again, understanding the labeling layouts, formats, and locations of where labeling and content is going to be provided on the packaging. And certainly, if your product includes an IFU or a patient implant card, you need to take that into consideration as well. Where is this going within the package? What are its physical sizes? Does it fit? And finally, from a warehouse and shipping perspective, what are your distribution channels? Where are you shipping it to, and what methods are you using to move your product through your overall supply chain? So now that you've formally established all your user needs and design inputs, and now have some really good design requirements, now you can finally start the design process. So first things first, I know we always focus on the sterile barrier system, as we should, but the overall design process really needs to take into account the overall packaging system. As ISO 11607 defines it, it's the combination of the SBS, the sterile barrier system, and the protective packaging, which would include secondary and tertiary packaging as well. I would also note that it also includes the labeling. When I think of the overall actual design process, I think of it in these 4 steps: design, prototype, test, and learn. As you can see, this is a cyclical approach, and realistically, you'll go through this process as many times as necessary until you do have a flawless package design. So the next few slides, I'll dive a little bit deeper on each of these design process elements. So first things first, let's design the sterile barrier system. Per ISO TS 16775, which is the guidance document for ISO 11607, it states the goal of the package design process is a sterile barrier system which allows the medical device to be sterilized, maintain sterility until the point of use or expiry date, and allows the medical device to be presented in an aseptic manner at the point of use. So, designing the sterile barrier system, the first thing you're likely going to do based on those design requirements is select the sterile barrier system format or type. And what I mean by this, is what format is this going to take shape in. There's three here that are listed. These are really the 3 main ones. Is it going to be some form of flexible pouch, a rigid tray with lidding, or is it going to be a form-fill seal where there's a form bottom web sealed to a top web? There's certainly other sterile barrier systems that are out there, but these are certainly the 3 most common. So once you have a sterile barrier system format, now you're going to be able to define what materials it's made of. So a lot of inputs are going to be made here related to the sterilization, compatibility, the actual biocompatibility of the materials themselves, as well as are there any barrier requirements for the device, and also any physical properties that are going to be required. Oftentimes, sterile barrier systems will include some form of printing or labeling. You're going to want to make those considerations made at this point as well. Is anything going to be pre-printed, or is there any additional labeling that's going to be applied? So in conjunction with the actual sterile barrier system, you really want to take into consideration the internal protective packaging as well. So this would be inside the sterile barrier system. So these could be things such as die-cut mounting cards, abrasion or sharp protection, such as tip protectors or TPU or polyurethane, any sort of retainment features that may be required. Additionally, maybe some type of cushioning materials such as foam. Now that you've designed the sterile barrier system, let's move on to the protective packaging. So again, the guidance document here at 11607, ISO TS 16775, states that the protective packaging provides physical protection to the SBS and its contents. So at this point, you're really going to be selecting and determining the packaging types, materials, and construction for those secondary and tertiary packaging components. From a secondary perspective, it's often going to be paperboard carton. Tertiary perspective, it's going to be typical distribution packaging, corrugated shippers, palletization, that type of thing. As part of those components, you're also going to want to consider printing as well. Again, anything that's going to be pre-printed or have labeling applied to it. Additionally, in addition to just the secondary, tertiary packaging, there may be additional protective cushioning packaging materials that may need to be included as well. Again, such as foam. So now that you've got some design requirements and some design concepts determined, you're now able to go into the prototyping phase. So what you're generally going to do is you're going to use electronic model files of the actual devices for some initial designing and modeling. But ultimately, you really want to get your hands on the actual physical device samples themselves. This could be prototypes, 3D printed components, or ideally the actual devices themselves. So oftentimes we're using existing materials that if you have them on hand, I strongly encourage you to mock up some rough samples. I would refer to this as arts and crafts. I mean, you can learn a lot from cutting up various packaging materials and sealing them together with tape, stapling, whatever it may be, just to get some rough ideas of the overall concept. But really, it's super important at this point to engage your material suppliers. And similar to being on the project team, you want to include those material suppliers in this process as early as possible. They're really going to be the experts on their portfolio of offerings and the materials that they're able to provide you. And they're also going to be able to suggest maybe certain materials or design features as it relates to those design requirements. They're also likely this wouldn't be their first package that they're designing. They're going to have a lot of past experience and can help guide you as it relates to overall package design as well. And certainly as you get to the point where you're defining a package design with your supplier, there'll be an opportunity to request samples or prototypes from them. And ultimately we'll use those prototypes here in the next step. So step 4 is really feasibility testing. So ISO TS 16775 defines this as an engineering evaluation in which the SBS, possibly only a prototype at this point, is subjected to testing. And the results of this testing determine if the design is worth pursuing. And that's really the whole goal here. We're trying to determine if the design that we've created is worth pursuing for final production and final design verification. Feasibility testing is not a requirement. You do not have to do feasibility testing. However, I would strongly encourage it. The whole point of doing the feasibility testing is to really build confidence in your design prior to conducting final design verification type testing. So feasibility testing, now that you have some prototypes, I encourage you to get actual devices, or at this point maybe even prototype devices as well, and confirm does fit, form, and function. Place the devices within the packaging and evaluate it yourself to understand if those design requirements and concepts that you created are ultimately what you thought they would be. I would note that if you're designing a package for multiple sizes, that you confirm fitment with all those sizes. I've seen examples where a package was designed for maybe the smallest and the largest, but it's kind of a unique situation, but the middle size did not fit within the package. So definitely confirm fitment with all sizes. Also, you're going to want to share these prototypes with your internal customers for any sort of evaluation or feedback. And then you're also going to want to share them with your external customers, your actual end users, if at all possible. This concept would be considered a formative usability evaluation. ISO 11607 Part 1, Section 7.5 note states that as part of or prior to your usability evaluation, which would be your final usability evaluation, it can be useful to perform formative studies where users are observed exploring a sterile barrier system and its opening features without guidance. So the idea is that you explore these prototypes with your end users to understand, are they meeting all of their needs. When we typically probably think of feasibility testing, we're trying to understand the overall performance. So as it relates to, how does it perform after environmental conditioning and distribution conditioning? At this stage, you're likely only going to have a few samples, a few device samples, a few package samples, but that's okay. That's all you're likely going to be able to get your hands on at this point. But you're going to want to be able to test them through this feasibility test to continue to build confidence in your design. I would recommend that this should ideally mimic your final design verification testing process, whatever that would look like, including the processing, sterilization, and environmental distribution conditioning. But I would also want you to consider as a best practice to perform some overstress testing or even testing to failure, as this will ultimately provide the highest level of confidence in your design prior to final design verification testing. So this chart here, the first column outlines a common distribution conditioning method, ASTM D4169, and the various schedules. Here in the second column, the normal, those are the conditions for each of those schedules. Since you have a limited sample size, you could certainly expose your samples to the normal distribution conditioning. And if you fail, that's great. You can obviously redesign from after getting those results. But if you pass, typically since you have such few samples, you probably don't really know if you just passed or if you're really on the edge of failure. So to be able to get more information out of the few samples that you have, I would strongly encourage you to maybe perform overstress testing. And this is just an example. So essentially, we're increasing the test severities, durations, and this is 125% of the normal. So going from a 24-inch drop to a 30-inch drop. So this will help you build more confidence in your design with fewer samples. But really, as a best practice, and my personal preference is really testing to failure. So what you would really do is go through the various schedules, and especially as it relates to drop testing and vibration testing, and drop your package at increasingly higher and higher drop heights, higher vibration severities or durations, and ultimately you're trying to figure out, if my package fails, when does it fail? Does it fail at 30 inches or does it fail at 48? The further you are away from what your normal is, the more and more confidence you have within your design. So, with that, this is a lot of testing, right? One question may be, we don't really have the we don't have the time, we don't have the samples, and we don't have the budget to do this sort of feasibility testing. And I would challenge that question with, do you have the time, the samples, and the budget to do this twice all over again in the event that you do fail? So strongly encourage feasibility testing if you can. One thing, there is really no rules to feasibility testing. It's whatever you determine you want to do. I would strongly encourage you to do something rather than nothing, and that something could be something as simple as dropping samples from your desk. You could certainly learn from doing just that, but following the feasibility testing protocol such as this would certainly help build confidence or additional confidence within your overall design. So the final step here as part of the design process is really what you learn. Really one of the most important pieces here, right? So from a fit, form, and function perspective, do you have to change or modify anything? Same thing with the internal, external customers. Do they have any feedback that they need to be incorporated into designing? And then also the outcome of the actual performance testing that you're doing. Did you pass or did you fail? And going in through a redesign loop if needed. And it's really important to thoroughly root cause any failures to understand what sort of design changes need to be made. But certainly if you're going to fail, you're going to want to fail during feasibility testing, not during final design verification. And finally, what's the whole point of doing this? Ultimately, it's getting the results to determine if your design is ultimately worth pursuing. So with that, those are my 4 steps to creating a flawless package. A quick recap, step 1, you have to be an integral part of the project team. You have to ensure that the packaging design and development is involved early in the project to really provide sufficient time to create a successful design. You need to gather all your design requirements, including both your internal and external customers. Create design prototypes. Again, share these with those internal and external customers. Don't design in a vacuum. And then finally, build confidence in your overall design so that way you're able to create a flawless package for your final design verification testing and pass the first time. So with that is my presentation for today. I would like to make you all aware we have some additional webinars coming up with Dr. Jane Severin. She's going to be covering performance testing best practices on July 16th. Lon Goldbaum is going to be covering stability testing, constant time, but not forever on July 30th. And Harold Reisman is going to be covering aseptic usability guidance, validating customer requirements on August 13th. So with that, thank you so much for joining today, and we're turning it over for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Wes. Oh, I'm getting a bit of, okay, there we go. So thank you so much, Wes, for your presentation. You did an excellent job as usual. We have a couple of questions and one really funny comment, so I'm totally going to read that. But first question, in the early design phase, any feedback on how to create a design concept for various sizes of similar devices?
Sure. So when you're trying to create a package design for multiple devices, the first thing is try to understand what's common and what's different. Certainly designing initially around what's common, and then potentially creating maybe open spaces or something within the package that would allow for the variability in the areas that are not common. And I don't know, we also have the rest of our team on the line, Lon, Jane, and Harold. I don't know if you would have anything you'd like to add.
Sure. Hey, Wes, this is Lon. In addition to what you said, like figuring out the commonalities with that, it's best to get ahead of the curve and ask like the R&D team to give you like the best and worst case, right? Like looking at the smallest, largest diameters, longest, shortest width of the device, and then figure out like the touch points and how you want to secure it, whether it's in a tray from a Ren tool. Those are a little bit easier to do quick prototyping from, or a backing card, which is also very easy to make quick changes to.
And the one other thing I'd like to add, Wes, is from your feasibility perspective, identifying the worst case device size or characteristics to add into your feasibility would be ideal as well. So that would be something you want to consider as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As part of that feasibility process, certainly determining what is worst case would be part of that process as well. Thank you, guys.
Great. Here's the quick funny comment. So there's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over. I thought that was great.
All too true.
Sorry, Wes, what were you trying to say?
I said that's all too true. It happens so often, unfortunately.
And then the last question we have so far is, what would be the ideal sample size for feasibility testing?
Sure. I mean, realistically, the ideal sample size would be whatever you would typically do for, I guess, your final design verification test. That's ultimately going to provide you the most confidence in your design when testing. However, that's typically not able to be achieved often due to availability of components at this point, both device samples as well as packaging samples. So you're often left with trying to work with what you have available with, or what you have to work with what you have available, and oftentimes that's fewer samples. Obviously, if there's any way to get as many as you can, would be my suggestion. But ultimately, whatever you have available, that's typically what you're going to be running that feasibility testing with.
All right, that's all we have for questions. Wes and team, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add before we concluded.
I think we're all set.
All right, perfect. So thank you everyone for your participation today during this Brunch and Learn, and to our speaker, Wes Bush, and the SMEs in packaging. If you have any packaging questions or need help, you can always reach out to a Network Partners team member, and we can ensure it gets to the appropriate contact. Again, you'll receive this recorded presentation and PDF of the PowerPoint. So be sure to stay in the loop and follow Network Partners on LinkedIn to access our updates and our future free webinars. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your Thursday and weekend. Bye, everyone.